Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, July 8th, 2026. We'll do a little bit of warm up and then we'll jump into the video game news. Scrolling down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart. What have I been doing? Well, the big news for me is I was attempting to fix my dryer by dusting it out, and it really needed to have some parts taken apart, and there's in the lint trap of dryers with auto sensors, or at least of my dryer with auto sensors, there's these, I assume they're bimetallic strips that have wires connected to them. So as I took that off, the wires fell down the hole, and more than likely what had happened is that the exhaust vent had come loose, possibly a couple of years ago even, and dust was just getting sucked into all the points where dust and lint shouldn't be. So I have this dryer that in theory I think may only be 6 years old. You kind of want to get 10 years out of them, and in theory would be fine if you just took it apart completely and did a full dust job on it, but that is just way too much work for me. Every time I tried to do even 10-20 minutes of sucking or vacuuming up all the lint, my heart rate was dropping according to my smartwatch. And so yeah, what was an attempt to try and stall replacing the dryer failed, and I just took the opportunity to take advantage of the 4th of July sales, which weren't really that good, and buy a full new dryer. Particularly in my case, I have gas hookups, so I got a gas dryer, where I had an electric one before, which maybe that will help balance it to make this not that devastating of a waste of money, even though upfront it is definitely a lot of money to buy a clothes dryer. This one also has smarts in it to some extent. That was just the one that was most recommended in a quick search. I probably should have done more of a research, but yeah, the possibility that it's going to sense that the exhaust vent is obstructed may be an issue. Certainly, the gas hookup hasn't been used in many years, so if ever, as far as I know, it may have never been used. So there might be a problem there. We can only try and see. Also, the previous dryer really needed to be side venting, and it wasn't. So the vent, and this is almost certainly why it popped off, was going all around in a roller coaster like shape. I imagine collecting a lot of lint also. So there's a whole issue there. Now, this new dryer, according to the customer service, doesn't need a side venting kit, even though it's a GE, and the GE does have a side venting kit for some of their models, which is a massive, like, $150 for what really is probably about $20 worth of sheet metal. So yeah, we'll see if I can get the Home Depot people that they contracted with to actually install this thing correctly, not have gas leak, get it set up to side vent, punching out a hole, and I assume it is a real punch out hole that you have to do there, and that it isn't just a piece of plastic that you could just push out on the sides. My electric dryer did have a punch out to the side vent. So yeah, that certainly wasn't done when I got the electric dryer. This does weirdly free up a 240 volt plug, and we'll see if I want to put like a Zigbee Tuya plug on it, since it has smarts on it to start with. I'll live with its own smart system, but very possibly to get the GE smart app to communicate, you would have to go through some kind of home assistant setup, which is the plan eventually, but certainly not the plan at any time soon. And so yeah, also the delivery date's kind of late. I have basically until the 16th, so 8 days in which I cannot do any laundry unless I want to do laundry and then hang up the laundry, which is a really long amount of time for most people. Fortunately, I just finished doing laundry, so going over a week without doing laundry should be okay for me. But yeah, that certainly would have been unacceptable if you were living with a normal family where just every weekend is laundry, or 3-4 times a week, if not every day, there's laundry being done. Which, yeah, that really highlights where particularly having babies and children becomes a lot more of a hassle, as far as you just, any free time on a weekend you might have wanted to have gets sucked up doing maintenance and all of that. Other thing I've been doing is I'm still struggling somewhat to go through the follow list cleanup. The thing that's most distracting there is that I'm just playing Metroid Prime, which I'll talk about Metroid Prime in a second. Metroid Prime 1. But yeah, I'm trying to go through the Steam follow list setup I have and cull a massive amount of games that either don't have actual listed release dates or have AI in them, and frankly a ton of games have AI in them. It definitely feels like Valve just forced everybody to go back and disclose AI, and it definitely feels like a lot of games had been made with AI in the past 6 months or so without originally disclosing them. That being said, it may also just be the case that they were always disclosing the AI, and that I just was not seeing the AI warnings because I was just kind of naive to it, which is very reasonable to believe. As far as AI detection, it takes, I imagine, a while to learn the newest tricks that AI does. I did hear about somebody teaching a course on detecting AI photographs and just like learning specifically that the AI always wants to center things perfectly, always wants things to be as pretty as possible, and so a regular random photograph would be easier to diagnose whether AI is in it or not. Of course, that probably isn't going to work too well in video games, since everything is just generated. The question is it generated with AI or not? And inherently, I've seen some games disclose that they're like using Photoshop to generate backgrounds, and then they're changing the backgrounds, and that is probably a smaller form of AI that's a problem, because you're still probably paying a artist, or in most cases these are indie people that are not paying themselves, to do most of the amount of work that they would have done before for the most of the amount of hours. But then there is also a lot of games that just, it's like one voice line is using text to speech and they're disclosing AI, and it feels like what game developers are going to realize pretty quickly is that it is probably better to just not use AI and get that scarlet letter on their game. Although maybe they are just trying to flood the market. Even if you set aside the AI issue as far as games on the backlog, there's still a massive amount of games on the fall list, not backlog, that are just irrelevant 6 months later. They just don't have any reviews at all. They still look too much like RPG Maker games or low effort games. And these would have been ones that I would have probably been mentally drained and just added to the follow list because I didn't want to think about it. And I'm not even thinking really about any of the games that would be iffy. I'm just eliminating the absolute obvious games from the fall list, and I'm making massive amounts of progress. But I'm doing that in small chunks. Usually it's, I think, 15 to 25 games. One of the things I've done with the macro is, because when you remove a game from the fall list gets shorter. There's one fewer games. And that shortness is in the middle more than at an end. There's no way to rerun the macro and be 100% accurate unless you're keeping count, and I don't know how you would really keep count. So what this is doing is it's starting at the end with the Z's and working its way to the A's, since the fall list is alphabetical. So every time I run it and it opens 15, 25 more things, it goes back from a pointer number, just a point to start at, and subtracts that 25, 15 from that and works its way backwards, which in the process of opening the tabs actually works fairly well, because the newest child tab opened by JavaScript, at least as it seems, is always going to be directly to the right of the first parent tab. So everything gets pushed to the right. So it then turns it into an alphabetical list, because there is a double flip-flop happening there in the way things are done. Now, I don't know if I'm going to really try and do anything like that to implement the news pages being opened up, since the news stories themselves are relatively disconnected from each other. It kind of doesn't matter if we talk about a story that is a couple days ago. In fact, it's probably better to talk about a story that was a couple days ago in case there's an update to that story later, and then we would be moving in chronological order instead of the way it is right now, where sometimes we do get stories that have been updated and then we mostly skip the stories that were before then. I was very surprised in the last stream too, in that we only went 2 hours and 20 minutes. Seems like the AI auto closing is fully in effect. So with the elimination of just all AI games and only looking at games that claim not to have used AI that are new to Steam, these streams now might be very much more manageable, which is great and gives me a little bit more free time. Plus, I'm no longer having to run the shorts macro after streams, so while I am unlikely to be energetic enough to want to actually start recording something immediately after streaming, there is definitely more of a window to do something there, and maybe that something should just be scheduling videos to record. That might be a better system. So to get to Metroid Prime, while also letting Stargate Atlantis play in the background and paying very little attention to that, I did mention that Stargate Atlantis in its cover art has all the characters in black letter. Apparently they did do a bit of a costume change after the third season, I think in part because they were trying to hide that they were from Atlantis, but honestly I think it's just that they didn't like the costumes. But I kind of liked the green non-military costumes that were being shown originally in Atlantis, and the idea that it was a non-military base at the beginning at least had an interesting thought to it, even though almost every single episode had them fighting with somebody and shooting somebody, so it was still very much a military show. But yeah, they've lost several characters by the fourth season, just people coming and going, and none of the characters were particularly good. It was fairly obvious that the main female protagonist, I guess you'd call Taylor that, was pregnant for many episodes before they announced that she was pregnant. And yeah, she as a character really hadn't been doing much of anything, and they still are really just fighting replicators and the Wraith, mostly the Wraith, which is the same thing they'd been doing for 3-4 seasons now. Like, they still occasionally have hand-to-hand combat fight sequences for no good reason. But yeah, there is, I think, slightly better writing in the fourth season, but not by much. Yeah. At the very least, and this is how bad writing is in TV, you would think, is that with the Star Trek shows, you would just have the writers watch Star Trek The Next Generation, and just rip off the previous episodes, maybe put a slight spin on them. But they don't even do that. Like, but particularly for like Stargate shows, there needs to be a lot more diversity in the types of stories being told. It does seem like at the beginning of the fourth season they have a few more medical emergency type things, a few more nightmare type things. They threw in a time travel episode. All of it really is to try and tell this one linear story, though. Stargate Atlantis in particular would be very bad if you tried to run it in syndication with random ordering. Most of the episodes wouldn't make any sense at all in that case. Whereas a random Star Trek episode tended to actually work fairly well, and that's what helped the original Star Trek succeed, is syndication and just getting seen in random orders. Even The Next Generation, for the most part, if you miss the beginning episode of a season and the last episode of the season, the episodes work fairly well in random order. Yeah. I will say Babylon 5 probably doesn't work very well if you don't watch it all in order. But yeah, I think it's rarely the case that that's the type of show you should try and make, where it's just a long mini-series. Okay, so then to talk about Prime 1. Prime 1 clearly is a game that is somewhat poorly laid out. It's basically designed to make you run around in circles, and if you don't fully figure out which directions to run around in circles, you will run around in even more circles. I did realize that I'm probably making it a little bit harder on myself in that I'm not saving the game and exiting out and loading the game, which is something you probably would do with Prime 1 if you were playing it on an original GameCube. But because I'm playing it on a Steam Deck, I'm just saving the state and sleeping the Steam machine, and obviously the game does not handle that thought, or doesn't know that the Steam Deck is going to sleep. When you load back in, you do tend to get reminders and notifications of where to go, it seems, a little bit more often. But I am at a point now where I have maybe 3 or 4 of the Chozo artifacts to collect, and it's just telling me to go back to the local location where the Chozo artifacts are to be collected, probably to fight some kind of boss character, or maybe just to skip to the end without actually collecting all of them, which I would think would be mandatory. And the Chozo artifacts in particular, still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, have almost all the new cards for the newest expansion. Still playing Memento Mori too. Yeah, the Chozo artifacts though are just hints, so the general idea is that you would have wandered around the game enough that you'd memorized the entire world, and then you would be able to read the hints and know where to go and what to do, which is somewhat questionable. I haven't even found the super missile for the ice beam gun, and yet I have everything else. So I've just totally missed a upgrade. I have about 160 missiles. I think there's 255 missiles to collect in particular. I suspect there's 9 power bombs to collect. I think I can hold 7 now. So yeah, it says I have collected, I think, about 70% of all the items in the world, and I would have a hard time finding the rest of them unless there's just a major area. Now I've scanned probably 94% of all the scanned things, with the fact that the vast majority of things that you scan in Metroid Prime don't even count towards the scan count. If it's an orange thing, it probably doesn't count. If it's a red thing that's not a pirate data item, pirate log, then it probably doesn't count as something that needs to be scanned. Yeah. I definitely had trouble with one of the boss fights, in that the Steam Deck is still just not really designed with the button layout of a GameCube controller, so doing super missiles is rather hard. And yeah, there wasn't really a save space anywhere close to that boss fight, and so I just have been using save states, which I've been using save states a lot to effectively cheat at Prime 1. If I do a platforming section and I get a couple jumps in, I'll just make a new save state because I don't want to fall down and have to start all over again. If I'm standing right in front of a boss fight, I'll make a save state because I don't have to run around. There is a lot in Metroid Prime 1 where you just take damage because you're running through hallways and you don't want to fight enemies again, or you're running through rooms and you don't want to have to fight the enemies again, which shows kind of a lack of interesting interaction there, particularly when you're getting lost, particularly when the Chozo ghosts are showing up and attacking you just because you want to get through a room fairly quickly. There's way too many hallways that are just loading sections. where I think you would, if you were making a modern Metroid Prime, have much more of a overworld that was open world in its nature, and I'll get rid of a ton of the transitional load sections. And yeah, maybe you would just want to make the game a lot shorter of a game anyways. Metroid Prime very much is a different type of experience compared to the 2D Metroid games. And yeah, you just aren't able to set off a power bomb and have an icon of a super missile expansion appear in some secret hole, secret wall. In fact, there's very rarely a case that there's anything in a secret wall. Usually it's going through a room to get a missile expansion, or getting to a spot where you can see the missile expansion, you just can't reach it. So yeah, I mean, it was their first outing going to 3D for Metroid. So it obviously was different, but certainly if you were going to remake the game, you probably would do a lot better. Particularly the magma caves, or magmor caves, are a very linear path, and it becomes somewhat questionable there. Do you take the elevator that is closest to you to go to the next spot they want you to go to, or do you take the elevator that is furthest away from you to go to a new location? But yeah, I generally just kind of am going to have to look up a walkthrough to get the super missile for the ice beam, I think, and figure out why I don't even have 2 hints for the last 2 Chozo artifacts. But yeah, that is basically what I've been doing. Spending most of my time is playing, and still feeling fairly motivated to play Metroid Prime 1. Again, it's a shame I can't make any footage here. I probably could have done a lot more commentary and criticism if I had done that, which is to say I haven't gotten back to Motion Memorandum. I've also yesterday probably spent way too much energy, and now I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping that doesn't make me sick doing the little amount I actually was able to accomplish with my dryer. Yeah, honestly, even if I had gotten it dusted, I was thinking of in November getting a new dryer, or maybe next year getting a new dryer. Anyways, there is almost certainly 20% at least efficiency in going from a 120 volt, going from a 240 volt electric dryer to a 120 volt gas dryer. And electricity, I imagine, is going to just continue to skyrocket in price. So yeah, I haven't been playing any games as far as making footage, and that's because I've been doing the fall list cleanup. But yeah, we can see that the fall list cleanup has gotten us down by over 1,000 games already. And honestly, I was thinking I was going to get it down to 2,000, but I may not even get it that far. But even getting it down to 3,000 is making some level of progress. I am also working on the slideshow script, which, yeah, that will kick in at some point. I'm rewriting most of that code so it stops using local storage cookies and starts using internal settings so that you could turn any web page into a slideshow. just by clicking a box down here, which honestly I think the boxes in all the settings will be hidden by default, and there will just be a hotkey to access it. And honestly, it probably should be an accessibility key, but I'm just going to use like plus, minus, asterisk, and divide. Which are things you're less likely to type on a web page. Yeah, probably if the faultless wraps around, which is what I'm really trying to test here, and I could just change the pointer to make it like 1. If it wraps around and works perfectly, then that'll be the point where I imagine I'll stop doing the faultless cleanup and instead start focusing in on other code as far as news goes. We still have 1 day of the summer sale, and certainly my budget is blown at this point. Very blown. Having to buy a dryer. Which, yeah, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong with the gas dryer, and maintenance. Just being properly maintained is going to be a focus too. Yeah. If you see these stories, and most of them are just repeats of one instance where it really happened, and exaggerations on that one instance of gas leaks and people just thinking their house is haunted or something because they're getting poisoned by natural gas. And it wouldn't get that far with me because I have alarms, but if it's not done right, the alarm's going off, then just creates the problem of it needing to be fixed. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I would trust buying a dryer from Amazon.com, which would have possibly given me more cash back on the store card. But yeah, I don't think for a second I would trust who they would hire any more than I would trust the Home Depot people, which I don't trust them that much either, because they are just hiring people who are signing up for a list and they're vetting them very little, if at all. But yeah, you look at Amazon packages and they sometimes are kicked around quite a bit. You definitely don't want that with a 100+ pounds, 200+ pound dryer. But yeah, I'm also concerned that they're going to say they can't squeeze it in through the path that I have cleared, and that would be an issue too. Because I don't want to have to move a whole bunch of more stuff. I suppose that is maybe a slight argument that even if you have well, in this case, I guess it's mostly, since the dryer's in the garage, if it wasn't just that the garage was full and that you can't open the front door of the garage and come in from that side, it's a problem. And once I finally get that solved, this would have been a lot easier of an install instead of going all the way through the hallways in the house. I'm still not sure why my macros are just not working anymore. in the way they should. All the interstitials are opening up, but then all of the news and stuff is just getting sorted in the wrong order. It's probably because I turned off another plugin. Let's see. So yeah, let's go through the video game news now. That wasn't that much of a warm-up, but I suppose there wasn't too much to really warm about it. There's not much to say about getting a new driver other than it sucks to need to do that, or playing Metroid Prime 1, which it is somewhat interesting that I'm going around and playing games I've played once before in my life instead of playing new games, but that doesn't seem like inherently a bad thing. It just it does make me wonder if I'm maybe not going to be able to play as many new games as I'd like before I grow old and die, if I go back and become nostalgic and play old games. On the other hand, this might be a great time to play old games, with PlayStation and Xbox getting rid of discs, and frankly not that many new games being good. I saw on Reddit, it does seem like Obsidian is working on a new Fallout game, according to Jason Schreier, who tends to be mostly accurate with leaks and probably the only person you really should listen to or give any credibility to as far as leaks go. If this is true, then that does potentially mean that there will be some Fallout New Vegas 2 like game being made. That being said, I don't know and really don't believe for a second that the Obsidian of today is the same Obsidian that made Fallout New Vegas. I don't 100% believe that it will be called Fallout New Vegas 2. It may very well try to be way too tied into the Fallout TV series, and it may very well be a very different experience. What would be most interesting about this, if it actually comes to pass, would be a potential Fallout game not using the Gamebryo engine, but instead possibly using the Unreal Engine or some other engine, which might make a big difference, certainly too. But yeah, Obsidian seems like they are going to be in that direction. The question, I guess, is what have they been doing in the past and why haven't they been doing it up until this point? And that is a good question, certainly, to ask about Bethesda associated things in general. So the headline here is Bethesda's boss tells its staff it will restructure around their strongest franchises after the cuts, which seems like a really long way of saying they're not doing anything new and they're abandoning Starfield in particular. And honestly, it kind of feels like they're not changing too much. So they're rebuilding around Fallout. They should have been making Fallout games this whole time. Elder Scrolls games, they should have been doing that the whole time. Doom, they should have been doing Quake and Wolfenstein. And with the exception of Elder Scrolls, in the past 10 years, there have been games around all these franchises. So it's not like these franchises have not been worked on and have just been sitting on a shelf. None of this really feels like it's touching on the problem of them taking too long to develop Elder Scrolls games, or the fact that Fallout 4 was pretty generic and boring and had a gameplay mechanic that most people just didn't care about. There is issues potentially with making Wolfenstein 3, but I think it's going to happen. I don't know if a new Quake game really is going to get people's attention, and then they're going to continue to try to make Doom games, but they seem like they are innovating a lot on Doom, perhaps too much on Doom, So I'm not sure it's consistently holding on to its fandom. There is a argument I heard online that say that Phil Spencer was just a really bad boss, which is very believable. But I don't know if this Asha Sharma is really a good boss, and we may very well find that she is perhaps just bad in a different way. Yeah. The headline here in this notification, this news, really says absolutely nothing. And if anything, it kind of still highlights the cronyism and the management issue that happens in most businesses, in that we've seen tons of layoffs, but we have seen very few stories, if any, from Microsoft middle management or upper management leaving, other than Phil Spencer himself back when Asha Sharma took over. Sure, when Double Fine buys out its own independence, the management of Double Fine leaves with them, but particularly at Bethesda, the managers' heads should roll. And there should just be a whole new group of people in charge. And definitely all of ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda, should probably be laid off. Notice this is also Bethesda saying this, so Bethesda basically only has these games other than Starfield. The other ZeniMax properties like Prey would not be under Bethesda. Alright, Gamatsu says eBaseball Pro Spirit 2026 official trailer is available to watch if you want to look at that. Yeah. I suppose it is a baseball point, but maybe it's not actually baseball city. Baseball season at the moment. Certainly the sport I've been hearing people talk about is FIFA and the World Cup. But, and yeah, this is the first time I've ever felt like it's been covered in America anywhere as much. Yeah. But yeah, I imagine once the World Cup is done, that will be the end of soccer talk in the United States for a good long time. Let's see, Gaming on Link says the giant creature city building builder, The Wandering Village, is getting a watery DLC. Definitely saw a lot around that game, and I guess it did eventually manage to make its way to my wish list, but I was always a little iffy on it, and I still feel like I'm a little iffy on it because it really is just a city manager game at its core. And those city builder colony sim games tend not to catch my attention, but that's more of a personal thing. As you can see, it is 94% positive in the last 30 days, which, yeah, it definitely feels like on Steam you do not get overwhelmingly positive as a label unless you are approved by Valve. It doesn't seem like there's a way to trigger it. 91% positive with over 7,573 user reviews feels overwhelmingly positive to me, considering how many games barely get 30 user reviews. Let's see, Nintendo is winding down the original Switch sales in Europe. This is GameDeveloper.com. We kind of had already covered that because of the European law that is going to require them to have a replaceable battery. They don't want to put replaceable battery models of the original Switch, so they're only doing it for the Switch 2, which does make an interesting possibility in that there might very well be far fewer European Union Nintendo players out there in the future, and that there will just be people who don't want to buy a Switch 2 and can't buy replacement Switch 1s, so there might be a whole lost generation, which who knows what they'll move to otherwise. In that case, maybe PC, maybe nothing, maybe Xbox, maybe PlayStation. Video Games Chronicle says State of Decay 3 no longer needs to release on Game Pass following the Xbox split. The game was announced in 2020 but reappeared last month. I would think that even a medium-sized game like State of Decay 3 probably benefits more from being released on Game Pass than it suffers from it. But yeah, we'll see, I suppose, what happens there and how they feel about that. It definitely would be a calculated risk, like, to change your plans from 6 years ago. Let's see, we've got a game on Steam here called Beekeeper, which, yeah, doesn't look interesting enough. Gamatsu says the emotional cyber noir adventure game Moonhack has been announced for PC. Looks anime-ish, visual novel. I do feel like before I put out like the buttons script in particular, I probably should relabel the early access to something else. I don't know what else it should stand for as far as planned release. Perhaps PR maybe makes some sense. EA for the most part makes sense as early access, but yeah, PR feels like press release. This says it's going to support English, so I'll just put it on the follow list. Gaming on Linux says the PlayStation 2 emulator for ARM devices, ARM SX2, gets its initial Linux release. There, I suspect, will be a trailing pattern for trying to get emulators to run on ARM, but it really shouldn't be that trailing because you're already taking older hardware and converting it to a modern hardware standard when you're emulating regular games. So yeah, it shouldn't be that big of a difference. The biggest issue that will cause the trailingness of it, if that's really a word, I don't think it is going to be the fact that ARM CPUs in general are not as powerful as AMD 64 CPUs are. So I wouldn't be surprised if it is 2, even 3 decades before you get really good PlayStation 3 emulation on ARM chips, if ever, particularly since the PlayStation 3 is so difficult. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot earlier to get PS4 and PS5 games to run on ARM, just because PS4 and PS5s basically are regular computers. PS3 is the by far most difficult hardware to emulate, it seems, followed by Nintendo 64 being the second hardest. And then I imagine some of the other really obscure things might be somewhat difficult to emulate just because there isn't that much interest in it. I wouldn't be surprised if it is kind of hard to emulate, like Philips CDI things. Let's see, there's a report here from GameDeveloper.com saying that Obsidian is losing around a quarter of its staff to the Xbox reset. The Pentiment and the Outer Worlds studios are reportedly losing 60 to 70 employees in the cuts. I don't know why this isn't on. We're just getting more and more ads because I haven't fixed my router back up. Yeah, it's just one thing after another. Router breaks and a lightning strike. Then my dryer needs to be replaced because of dust. Not the same issue by any means, but something happens and then it just doesn't get taken care of fast enough, and then the next thing happens and it just snowballs. And the real fear is that give it a couple years and you're just living in a hoarder's house full of trash floor to ceiling because everything is just so overwhelming mentally to do anything with. Yeah, I don't plan on that happening to me, but there is always that fear in the back of my head that something like that might happen. That has nothing to do with this though. Yeah. The question certainly there is, when you're laying off that many people, a quarter of your staff, are you the same company at that point? Do you have the same skills? Do you have the same mentality that you did? Could you possibly make a game that you, like the games you made before? Or will the people who get laid off go off and form their own company and do it better? People do like Grounded and the Outer Worlds. I don't think people really did like Avowed, and this may very well be just Avowed being the biggest problem there. There's definitely a question as far as how the layoffs are also being implemented. Is it first in, first out, or last in, first out? If you're trying to save money, it might be the first in, first out, meaning your oldest, most established, most intelligent programmers are getting laid off. If it was last in, first out on layoffs, which is more how a union would require it to be, it would be the youngest employees who just got hired to get laid off by seniority. But yeah, if it's an actual layoff and not a firing, you can't very easily pick and choose who you want to keep and who you don't want to keep without creating some kind of documentation to prevent yourself from being sued. Although, let's face it, you probably can get away with quite a lot as far as picking and choosing. And there might be a lot of cronyism going on there too, and that friends of the managers get saved, where people who the managers don't like get fired. There is definitely going to be claims of racism and sexism in these layoffs too, which may or may not be true. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Sony goes quiet as the Don't Kill the Disc petition reaches 165,000 signatures. Don't Kill the Disc petition amasses thousands of signatures as Sony stays silent. I sort of wonder if maybe Sony Interactive Entertainment's new president is just intentionally trying to ruin PlayStation and Sony. Like, it would be a way to shut down the company with the stronger unions in Japan, is to just run it very poorly. It more than likely isn't that, and he is just making bad decisions, but yeah, I could see where parent company of Sony Interactive Entertainment just wants to get out of the video game market completely, and they can't figure out a way to do that without pissing off all of their fans, which is what they're managing to do now. More than likely, though, I bet it's not anything that Machiavellian. I bet it is just a new Japanese CEO that is thinking in a very Japanese way. And certainly if you look at like the way anime box sets used to be sold, that was very much the case, and it's still very much the case in Japan, that you'll have 3-episode Blu-rays of anime series selling for $70, and that they just charge a very high premium and rip off their customers, and the Japanese put up with it a lot more than other people around the world will put up with it. Moving on, Gamatsu, the Gelaco Arcade Collections Volume 1 and 2 launched this winter for the PS5, Switch, and PC. I think that's Gelaco is how you would pronounce it. I don't know if I know any of these games. Yeah, I may have only really seen these arcades once or twice. They have kind of a tilted aspect to them. They're not so much stand-up arcades as they're sit-down machines. Yeah, I don't think they were particularly too common in the West. Yeah, if I scroll through all of these games, it's possible I've seen some of these. It's possible I haven't seen any of these. This is also a case where I run into a real problem with the whole setup of Steam pages, in that all it says is coming soon, and they just don't ever update that. Let's see, Gaming on Linux says Aster League 2179 is a kart racing spinoff from the Future Racer Ballistic MG. Okay. Yeah. This is another case where I'm adding things to the fault list and then potentially going to take them off. There's a report that roughly half of the id Software team has been laid off. Alright, so we are continuing to get this as news. Yeah. There's definitely a question as far as the id Tech engine, whether that would still be around. Like, we shall see. I suppose it is worth pointing out that if there's union involvement, you can sue to get your job back or get more compensation for being laid off. But the way the news always will report it is that it is as easy as just sending out a memo and people are laid off immediately. Even if you're not in a union job in the United States, there are very weak government National Labor Review Board protections that might kick in. But for the most part in the United States, if you're laid off, you're then immediately just expected to go on unemployment, at which point for a lot of these programmers, they're going to get very little of what they were earning before on unemployment, and unemployment is just going to immediately force you to take lower paying jobs, or at least apply for jobs within like the first week of being laid off. They don't give you any real wiggle room to get settled and just emotionally deal with the fact of being laid off. Unemployment is incredibly unhelpful compared to what it could be, and it gets underfunded and cut off fairly frequently. At which point, if you're not on unemployment and you're still unemployed, then there's just no statistics of knowing that you're unemployed, at which point you are just an unrecorded unemployed person, which makes unemployment seem a lot lower in the United States than it really is. They'll claim unemployment numbers around 20-30%, when the reality is, of the working aged people who could be working, people who are still healthy, unemployment is probably closer to 60 or 70%. A lot of those may be traditional wives, which would still technically be considered unemployed, but a lot of those also are just people who are underemployed or unemployed completely, and also typically not in school or any kind of education or training of any value. Yeah, the Japanese phrase "NEET," not currently in education, employment, or training, is starting to make its way around the world. And yeah, well, it is at least originally in Japan used as a insult term. I think as it spreads around the world, people are more realizing that no, this is just a person whose circumstances are really bad in a lot of cases. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. The gunning continues, I guess, is the best thing to say here. We're going to end up having a lot of stories like this. Xbox layoffs reportedly gutted id Software's coding team and cut 60 to 70 developers from Obsidian. That might actually be a good thing, though. In the same way that I don't really feel like id Tech, in the same way I don't really feel like the Source engine from Valve should be continued to work on, and that if they're going to do anything, they should just put the code that works from the Source engine into the public domain and into the Godot engine, in my opinion. But yeah, the id Tech engine feels very much the same. I just don't see a need for these engines to continue to exist. They probably didn't need to exist 10-20 years ago, when it was very much the move for big companies to try to have their own in-house engine. Probably still feels a lot like that's a good idea when you're programming from Unreal, because Unreal Engine, let's face it, is increasingly getting more focused on just running Fortnite, and there's a lot of extra custom code you have to do to the Unreal Engine because it is closed source to get your specific type of game to run really well. That's why we still have major micro stuttering issues in so many games that do use the Unreal Engine. Yeah, if everybody got on board in this utopian vision with Godot, I think id Tech engine can go away. I think the Source engine can go away, and by go away I mean the good parts of those codes could be added to the Godot engine, and there could just be a pretty big merger there. There is also probably half a dozen other engines out there that could disappear that I'm not even really thinking about. even if the engine itself went away, you're still losing the developers in these kinds of cuts. And so, yeah, there's almost certainly going to be a new company that gets formed, or several really small companies that get formed based off of these layoffs. Or, I guess the worst case scenario might be that they are all just hired in other computer science fields. Guess I can put this one on the wish list instead, and if that is the case, then I'm a little surprised this one doesn't have AI in it. Or doesn't claim to have AI in it, at least. A farming game, but it's vampires. It is a little bit of a twist. Not that much of a twist, but a little bit of a twist. Yeah, I could see a lot of laid off programmers going into AI jobs, just taking AI jobs because it will pay a lot instead of staying in the game industry. Let's see, Komatsu says Shangri-La Frontier, the Seven Colossi trailer. Shangri-La Frontier Day 2026 trailer is available. I don't recognize this. I'm pretty sure this was based off of an anime, but for all I know, it might be not that popular of an anime. Might be super popular though, and I just have missed it. Gaming on Linux says Crown Siege is an incremental tower defense game that has a fun demo worth a go. That reminds me, Captain Sparkles, the YouTuber, Minecraft YouTuber, partnered / made a video game that I think was called Fortress Fallout originally, then got a cease and desist before it even came out from Bethesda, and changed its name to Fortress Fury. They hadn't released a Fallout game for quite a while when they were calling it Fortress Fallout, and then they did announce Fallout Shelter before Fortress Fury came out. That was one of the games on the fall list, and yeah, it's not reviewed particularly well, continuing a pretty common pattern of content creators, video games getting made based on content creators or with content creators involved, and them not turning out very good. Which, in fairness, if you looked at the percentage of all games and the percentage that aren't that very good, and the percentage of games that have been made with content creators, those percentages probably overlap, and that we would need a lot more content creators to make a lot more games before we could get a better spin out there. Off the top of my head, only Video Game Donkey with Animal Well has actually managed to make a decent game that isn't some kind of joke game. Arguably, Game Grumps with like Dream Daddy Dating Simulator did get success, but also probably only got success because it was a silly game being promoted by silly content creators. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says IO Interactive is closing its Istanbul studio after regaining control of Project Fantasy. The studio said it must restructure to find sure footing after Xbox pulled funding for the in-development RPG. So yeah, it seems like that is a thing. Just gonna reload this page and see if the ads go away. Yes, they do. Those are internal ads. Anyways, but ads nonetheless. I definitely don't like the going around in circles style that this has set up, where we're not just looking at video game chronicles and Gamatsu and game developer articles, and then jumping around and looking at games that came out on Steam. Although the new way I set up my news to open up will have that issue, certainly, in that I don't have a good way, I think, of making it so that things will stay where they're supposed to stay and making it fast. Although fast may not really matter that much. Let's see. Video Games Chronicles says IO confirms it will continue Project Fantasy independently after the Xbox split. I do think we need a great new fantasy game, but in fairness, I also think we need a great new sci-fi game and a great new steampunk game and a great new history game. We just need great games in general instead of rehashing the same tired tropes. Particularly in fantasy, though, there's just a lot of things that are way too much based on Tolkien mentality or Dungeons and Dragons mentality, and just think that there's room for doing things different than that. That's one of the reasons why I do enjoy anime, or at least I originally enjoyed anime when I first got into it, is that everything in the Western world had already felt very played out and too similar to itself. So when you get something completely wild and crazy, then that feels very different. Certainly when Ghost in the Shell or Akira came out, that kind of sci-fi was very different from what you were getting in the West, which would have been pre The Matrix, pre most sci-fi shows. I guess the closest thing that would have been out would have been like Aliens and Blade Runner. All good movies, but not followed up with a lot of other things, and a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek influences too. It's also worth pointing out that when I got into anime, it was probably more that anime was getting popularized for a new generation. A very small niche audience still, but it probably wasn't when it first came out. Yeah, that probably was more in the 70s. A horror comedy adventure game called Oh Demon, Fix My TV is coming to PS5 in 2026. It's currently available for PC. This is a Gamatsu article, which, yeah. This is one of those cases where you have a little bit of dark screenshot syndrome, and it is rated very positively, but I don't know if I really want to play a game like this. So I don't want to think about anything at the moment because it would take too much time, but if I did think about it, I'd probably take this off the follow list. I do think there is a idea that is growing in my mind as far as just the number of games I'm actually able to play in a year, and that thought alone may start pushing me to say, you know what, there's almost no chance I would get around to playing this game, even if I got it for free, because I'm just not playing enough games fast enough. Let's see, this is Gaming on Linux. Alchemic Beast has a fun sounding spin on creature collecting based on creature championships. Okay. Alright. This is perhaps one of the few instances where I might excuse 8-bit graphics if you are making a whole bunch of different creatures. Then maybe that would make some sense there. Let's see if we can scroll down here. It's not out yet, and see how many creatures there are going to be in total. I think I would expect 150 at minimum, and I don't even see a number being pointed out there. In fairness, though, there's a lot more to even the first Pokemon game than just having 150 characters. You also have to have a decent map and play experience and some story of some sort. I'll put down the follows because it does look somewhat polished. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com, the Xbox CEO admits layoffs, is quoted as saying, "I think our core has to be healthy," end quote. And that turning around the Xbox will take time. It's not a sentence that I really can disagree with, and honestly, there is this possibility. Like, for the most part, all societies have succeeded by massive genocide of some part of the people around them. It's just the way things go, is that you, in this case, it's not people as much as it's employees, and it's not genocide as much as layoffs, but you don't get the United States to be where it is now without them, you know, killing off all the Native Americans. Yeah, and that's pretty much the same case in the China, and pretty much the same case in Russia. And yeah, to affect change, you typically do have to get rid of the parts that won't be helpful in the change. This is a terrible analogy. I really should have gone with the "you've got to cut the cancer out" analogy instead. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking of Asher Sharma. She is the new Pol Pot, just killing a whole bunch of projects that were going to lead them nowhere. And I do think there was a ton of projects there. But I'm not 100% sure that she's getting rid of the real garbage, because she, and see, inherently this is the problem, is she's the CEO of many subsidiaries that have upper management, of many other subsidiaries that may also have upper management, of even more subsidiaries that may have upper management. Unless she is personally evaluating the performance of all of those upper managers, she is more than likely telling the upper managers to find people to lay off, and thus those upper managers potentially are not laying off themselves, who are probably the prime people to be laid off. In particular, I would want to see significant amounts of managerial staff reduced throughout Xbox. I'd also like to see a much flatter structure and a lot more cooperation between different offices, instead of owning things in name only but not really controlling the day-to-day decisions. But yeah, I can't help but somewhat agree that there has been something wrong with Xbox in the way it's been run in the past years, and that may very well go all the way back to something like the attempt to have always on DRM on the Xbox Ones still being a mistake that's echoing even now. New games and updates are coming to Game Pass in July 2026, which usually wouldn't be news, but in these questionable times, there is certainly a possibility that that might stop happening. Weirdly, Gears of War Reloaded on Steam, not reviewed well. Mixed reviewed, even in the past 30 days. Which does make an interesting question as to whether I really feel a need to play Gears of War E-Day or Gears of War, any of the Gears of War games that are available on Steam. There is potentially a split that is going to happen here where I'm going to start thinking there are some games that maybe I want to own but actually don't even care to play, which, yeah, that would be a weird situation to say the least if that's what it got down to. Let's see, The Witch on the Holy Night anime movie premieres November 20th. This is part of the Fate Stay visual novel series, I believe. Or the not Fate Stay, but Fate series, which is super popular. But that would also be a very hard series to cover in its visual novel video game form. And from the fact that they do have a anime series, several anime series, it would just be easier to watch the anime series. A Postal spin-off, Flesh and Wire, reveals a new psychological horror gameplay. I don't recall this being announced. Which, remember, Postal most recently got in trouble by trying to have a spin-off game that was all AI. And Postal in general is never really been a great game series. Maybe the first Postal game made some sense for its time in kind of the era of a GTA game. But yeah, the idea of an edgelord game where you're just running around shooting people doesn't really work. This Flesh and Wire, in my mind, I think works a lot better, because then you have just like a horror game that really has no reason or need, as far as I can tell, to even be in the Postal universe. And frankly, they probably would be better to take it out of the Postal universe and just say, this is a new game from running on the scissors, and we're letting the Postal universe sit. Oh, it's this game. I just saw this on the fall list. Alright. So I had seen this game before, it's just I didn't remember it, which is another problem of having the fall list have way too many games on it. It's that it's way too many games I'm seeing, way too many games I'm forgetting about. This is a weird thing. They're calling it the roots, psychological roots of Postal, which is to maybe argue that they're trying to make the Postal series way more serious than it ever has been before. Let's do a little look here. Yeah, I don't like the featured. Can we just see all games? See, Postal 2, overwhelmingly positive, surprising. Postal 4, mixed. Postal Redux, very positive. Postal 3, seemingly completely missing. It's not a terrible thought that you might get to a point where you make a couple of good, successful games and then you just choose to move. Postal 1 is free, but I already have that. This is also another case, I think, where the Postal 3 is just completely missing. Yeah. So yeah, compared to the original GTA 1, I could see where this might make sense in 1997, but does it make sense 19 years later to make a Postal game? No. I don't think it really does. Right, I think I need to hurry up here or I'm going to start running out of energy. I did start later today. I do have something special I'm going to do early in the morning tomorrow, so that is why I'm shifting my sleep schedule a little bit. Supercell has started developer grants for African studios. The equity-free grant can range from $20,000 to $200,000. Interesting, certainly. It is kind of surprising how a lot of African locations now can get internet and electricity pretty well, but are still very much struggling to get clean, consistent water, just because of how difficult it is to get water in Africa, which maybe will create this situation where Africa becomes a new mecca in the next few decades of programmers who actually are programming things and doing things on the computer, but not AI data centers or any kind of big data centers, because there's just not going to be enough water to cool them unless they figure out some way to run chips extremely hot, which that's not beyond the realm of possibility, but it's unlikely to be the case. But yeah, I do think we could see a lot of African game studios popping up, making interesting new games. A big part of that too, though, is just going to be local government and stability in the region, which has been a problem in the past, certainly. 20,000 to 200,000 is not that much as far as games go. As far as how much it would take to develop a game, although in Africa that may be a lot of money, it still may not be that much if you have to buy computers and you have to buy licenses for software and things like that. See, Wario Land and 3 more Game Boy Classics hit Nintendo Switch Online today. Yeah, I am a little peeved at myself that I didn't actually finish to the credits of Wario World, not Wario Land, the GameCube game, and I didn't get all of the things done with Minish Cap. So now there's been 2 games where I really haven't 100%ed the games. I'm probably not going to 100% Metroid Prime either. But you know what? If I'm just playing for fun, why do I feel the need to 100% things? You should just play and just enjoy it and just be done with it when I'm done with it. Yeah, Japan has received 2 extra Game Boy Advance games. There is a question, certainly, as far as are they scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as Game Boy games, which would be 4 Shades of Grey. I think they probably are, because they're starting to run out of things that Nintendo originally licensed, and beyond that it would be a lot harder to bring anything over. I guess the good news there also is that there really weren't that many great non-Nintendo products on Game Boy Advance, but there was some. You can see Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land for Game Boy, and it shows your typical problems with a Game Boy game while still being somewhat nicely animated. But I believe it's 140 by 140 pixels and super slow processors, and 4 Shades of Grey being depicted in its somewhat accurate green makes these games incredibly small as far as screen to screen goes. In a lot of ways, that is very much what Metroid Prime also feels like, is that each room is just a screen on a limited Game Boy screen, and that you can have some pretty big caves, but they are all caves. They are not open worlds. Sword of Hope definitely showing the RPG aspect there, where there's very little graphics. When you get to Game Boy Advanced, I imagine the resolution is probably a little bit higher, but I would be kind of shocked if it was that much higher. If it was 640 by 640 or 640 by 480, I would be surprised. Oh, and yeah, let's remember Virtual Boy has been completely forgotten about that, because yeah, there's just no more games to add to it. So yeah, the Game Boy Advanced resolution is 240 by 160, whereas the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color was 160 by 144 pixels. That is a really small amount of pixels in both cases. Let's see, what would the 3DS resolution be? 400 by 240 for the upper screen and 320 by 240 for the lower screen. Which gets you at 720 by 480 as far as a resolution that's being pushed between the two. But in reality, you're never looking at both screens at the same time in the 3DS. Yeah. And let's just check what the Switch 2 resolution is. As far as the actual screen, not what it can put out. This is the point where native resolution might be it. Yeah. So yeah, Switch 2 is pushing 1080p on the native resolution or actually it's less than 1080p on native resolution. It's being upscaled to 1080p in handheld mode, and then it gets upscaled even more to 4K when docked. The native resolution is below 1080p depending on the game. Yeah, I don't think there's anything there. Yeah, the resolution debate gets blown out of proportion, and it talks very much in a hypothetical stance a lot of times when you get to PC gaming, in that people will say 4K native resolution at 144 frames per second is what they want, without actually mentioning that it's not what they're getting. And the only way to get the resolution anywhere close to that is for a lot of upscaling and cheating to be applied to games, which is a big factor as to why I kind of just promote 1080p 60. If you can get a consistently frame-paced 1080p 60, you should be fine. 4K only starts to make sense as a necessity once you start getting to a like 4K TV and you're sitting 8 to 10 feet away from that TV. But when you're PC gaming, for the most part, you've got the screen right in front of you. So with a handheld device like a Steam Deck or a Switch, that's the case. 1080p is fine there. Or if you're sitting at a desk and you're only a foot away at most from the screen, 1080p should be fine at that point too. Alright, well, I think this is a good point to take a little bit of a break. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, let's see. Gamatsu says Escape the Backrooms is now available for the Switch 2. Seems like you are a little late to the party in that case, since the movie's already come out. 1 to 4 player co-op game. This probably is one of the original ones. Does make a little bit of sense to put that on the wish list, even though I probably would never actually buy the game and play it, since it is too much of a streamer game for me, I think, compared to a real game. I'd be very shocked if it turned out that there actually was a decent story and experience there versus just trying to play something akin to Metal Gear Solid that you're trying to stealth around and escape. Let's see. Gaming on Linux says the open world zombie survival sandbox Unturned source code has been released. Interesting. Let's hit the play button here. Alright, this is low polygon to say the least. So yeah, well, it's kind of interesting that the source code has been released here. The visuals, I don't think, is going to make a game like this last for that long. Again, I think a lot of fandom around this game probably was streamers playing this game, in that it looked something like Minecraft, but it had guns and zombies, whereas Minecraft only has bows and zombies. But yeah, this definitely doesn't look that interesting to me. But somehow it's already in my library. I guess it's free with a gold upgrade. Yeah. And see, here's a great point to point out. Right now, there's 14,000 people online playing this game from 2017. There is a massive 500,000 positive, well, reviews, with 91% of them being positive. Still, it's only labeled as very positive in that case. Maybe you have to get up to like 95% before it's considered overwhelmingly positive. And yet, the logo here is just a very simplistic, I spent an hour in Photoshop at most logo. I mean, and because of that, there also is no AI mentioned here. So maybe this game doesn't have AI in it. I'd assume it doesn't. Or maybe it's just pre the need for disclosure. But yeah, you can get lucky. Any game can get lucky. And you don't really need to use AI to make your cover art. Because, yeah, that would be pretty boring for most games to have cover art that's just the name. But it kind of works too. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com says, quote, used, abused, and discarded. CWA Canada slams Microsoft over handling of Bethesda layoffs. Well, I agree. We'll have to see how powerful the CWA Canada really is and what they can really do about it. Effectively, the game industry should have been unionized 30 years ago, and then a long established union would have a lot more they could probably do at this point compared to unions that are maybe 3 or 4 years old. I do feel like there's something that I need to figure out how to make it automatically say whether or not I've added it to the follow list or the wish list or something. maybe just add a delay even, but I definitely am just looking at games and going through them and then not mentioning whether I'm adding them to the fall list or not. I guess I probably should just develop the habits of mentioning. The Tokyo Game Show 2026 unveils its exhibitor list, including PlayStation and Square Enix. No surprise there. This is from Video Games Chronicle. It looks like they're going with a new artist and a new concept, which I guess is girls in gaming. I would assume this isn't supposed to just be all the same girl with different hairstyles, although maybe the implication is that this is this one girl, and she's imagining herself in a whole bunch of different scenarios, although I don't know specifically what this scenario even is, as it seems like you're just eating food. And this is like an esports girl, and this is a JRPG player, and I would suspect this is probably supposed to be more of a creature collector exploration game. The concepts don't immediately jump out. The art style is also kind of interesting in that, like, I've never seen in Japanese animation a character like sticking their tongue out a little bit, biting on that. I've usually when they go cutesy, there's like a single tooth thing hanging out or something like that. Yeah, and I've only seen a few animators that have a style even slightly like this. So it almost feels like they had an animator attempting to do something more like a Western animation style. Interesting. Which maybe they do have this thought in the back of their head that the Tokyo Game Show mascot cover art should be more worldwide appealing. It certainly would explain the girls exclusively too. But yeah, that definitely felt like if you're going to show 5 characters on screen, you could have thrown at least one guy in there. Maybe an animal, more focused on. Let's see, Game Pass adds Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1+2, the Planet Crafter, Pal World version 1.0, and more to its mid to late July releases. Yeah. Feels like we're getting really into the dog days of summer. There's just nothing happening otherwise day to day, and I'm increasingly getting bored with the real world as nothing is happening. Well, tons of stuff is happening, but nothing of interest to me. Proton 11.0-1 has been officially released to expand Windows games on SteamOS. These are things we probably have already seen or getting improved in the betas, and now they are being put out from the point of betas to a stable channel. And yeah, you can see in that it feels like several betas worth of updates are now being put out, which I always end up saying the same thing on these gaming on Linux type articles, is that it's nice to see they're continuing to work on it, but I don't know what really could blow us out of the water, unless they found some way to get thousands upon thousands of games playable and then found some way to test thousands upon thousands of games. And I doubt there are even thousands upon thousands of games that are unplayable at this point. It's never going to be big numbers. It's going to be games that either were unplayable, are now playable, or games that were playable or more playable. A lot of these may be older versions of games that you may not even really want to play, like Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 original. Possibly not the versions of Resident Evil 1 and 2 you want to play. Let's see. Mario Kart Tour is being shut down and no offline version is planned. Another instance of where Stop Killing Games movement, if it had succeeded by this point, would have been helpful. Players are getting free Gold Pass benefits, but the whole thing is being shut down. I think this game has been around for a while and people weren't super into it, which, yeah, none of the Nintendo mobile games have really worked out great. And I think Pokemon Pokopia probably really goes to show that even if you're going to make something that's like a mobile game, Nintendo is going to want to just put that on the Switch 2 and fill up the games that you can play on the Switch 2. It would be more interesting to see if, like, the Nintendo app itself for mobile gets taken down, or the Nintendo Music app gets taken down from mobile. That would be a bigger change. And then Pokemon things like Pokemon TCG Pocket and all that goes through the Pokemon company, so I'd be surprised if that got taken down. Although it would certainly save me some time if all of a sudden Pokemon TCG Pocket just got shut down. I definitely don't think I would go on to the next Pokemon card game, even if they made a new one. And I think a lot of the audience from Pokemon TCG Pocket wouldn't go to the next game, because TCG Pocket is so much about opening packs and so little about actually playing the card game. Yeah. So yeah, when you see me swipe down like that, I'm closing the tab. But if I hit a hotkey to add it to the follow list, it just closes the tab. The game Orbital's voice cast has been announced with an opening animation. This is a Gamatsu article. This animation style looks interesting, but that's about the only thing that does look interesting in the game, because the rest of it is just not really the kind of gameplay experience you would expect. And I think it's a co-op game, weirdly, too. Let's see, Gaming on Linux says Xorg Server 21.1.24 and Xwayland 24.1.13 has been released to fix more security issues. Great. Yeah. Let's see. Glamour Font Atlas Heap Buffer Overflow Security Vulnerability. But yeah, it's surprising how many problems have popped up based on the way fonts were handled, particularly in Windows, but elsewhere too. The way fonts are designed is more complicated than you would think, and as such, overflow attacks have somehow managed to happen. Which, yeah, I think there probably is a good argument to rewrite the font handler code in Rust and see if that would add a level of security. That was an overflow vulnerability, and the whole thing that people talk about when they talk about Rust is how it makes it extremely difficult to have memory overflows and unsafe memory scenarios like that. Video Games Chronicles says Nintendo confirms the Switch 1 sales aren't yet ending outside of Europe, so you still can get a Switch outside of Europe, which may just mean a lot of people import / smuggle. I don't know if it actually would be illegal to bring a bunch of non-European Switches inward. It probably is if you have like more than one or two on you. Yeah, I imagine people will sneak in Switches from other countries to get their Switch ones. Yeah, a lot of these puzzle games are increasingly uninteresting to me, too. And yeah, the number of shorts I make are going to, I think, increasingly become more of my own curated selection also. Let's see. Komatsu says Echo Breaker launches August 6th. It's a fast-paced precision speedrunner from Upstream Arcade. Let's see. It's on Steam. Kind of feels like something like Marble Madness in its visual style. A little bit like that, not a lot. Well, I'll leave that on the follow list and we'll see what happens later. Humble Choice has some essentials for July 2026 like Sea of Stars and Drop Duchy. Okay. Tunic. There's a game. It's basically like a Zelda game, so I really should get it and just play it at some point. Yeah. That is something I haven't really put enough thought into, is the fact that if I am going back and playing Nintendo games like old Zelda games, I'm also probably satiating the urge to find something like a Zelda game on Steam that I can actually make footage from. Let's see. Video Games Chronicles says Xbox Game Pass has reportedly lost millions of users since 2024. They're down to 30 million according to reports. I also heard a statement, I don't know if this is really true, is that Phil Spencer said that they needed Game Pass to be up to 80 million for it to be sustainable, and that Phil Spencer said that when there was only 40 million units of Xboxes had ever been sold, so that they would need twice as many Game Pass subscriptions as every single Xbox ever sold. It's a pretty crazy thought. But yeah, Xbox Game Pass raised the price. No surprising, a lot of people left it, and no surprising that people haven't come back now that the price is back down. If people were going to come back because the price was back down, I think then all the layoffs become the next barrier to convince people to go back to Xbox Game Pass. Yeah, so as far as this great reset goes, they haven't really laid out any kind of plans to get people to go back to Game Pass. And honestly, it might have to be something as drastic as saying, if you buy a new Xbox or Project Helix, you just get a year free of Game Pass with it. Something along that line. Let's see. Captain Tsubasa 2 World Fighters Modes trailer. Firefox really wants me to update. is available on Gamatsu if you want to watch that. This game is not out, but I should have it on the fall list since it does have an actual release date. Let's see. Gaming on Linux says Neverness to Everness has been released on Steam, works on SteamOS and Linux with a workaround. And they're showing the workaround to get it to run. And it looks like it's a JRPG game. Rated fairly positively. I'm not 100% sure what this game is though. Seems like it's kind of all over the place. Yeah. I think it's probably a JRPG kind of mobile game where you're more randomly fighting monsters. But yeah, there's a lot of random stuff being shown here. Driving cars, driving motorcycles, being in jail, and then the other character also just doing slice of life stuff. You've got cat girls and anime girls and anime boys and skydiving and glider and standing on the side of walls and freezing time. Yeah, I suspect that's supposed to be the main gameplay mechanic, is that you're just fighting enemies in arenas. But I just don't really know. This could be something closer to Nier Automata than I think, or this could just be a random assortment of animations. Both feel very plausible. So yeah, I just don't know what to think at all for a game like that. Whereas a game like this I can just easily dismiss. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Microsoft's layoffs include a 37-year-old veteran behind Xbox backwards compatibility. La Chapelle is the latest high-profile name to depart Microsoft. It does probably make sense that people who are paid the highest, who have been there the longest, would get laid off. May also be that he was close to retirement anyways, and this might be a way of avoiding paying some kind of pension, but I don't think Microsoft has any kind of pension plan or anything like that. There is an interesting thought, certainly, as far as original Xbox compatibility, and you look at all the pictures here of games, and well, some of these might make sense that you still would want to play them in Xbox original backwards compatibility. I think the majority of these games are available on Steam, either in remastered or remake versions or in their original ported versions. So yeah, none of the Fear games would make sense. I don't think the Dead or Alive game would make sense. I don't think Mortal Kombat makes sense. If these SpongeBob games are worth playing at all, I think they may have been remade. Beautiful Calamari, I think, is on Steam. Maybe the Risen series, or this Conan game isn't. Can't even read that one. Sacred 2, I'm pretty sure it's on Steam. Time Splitters, I think it's on Steam, but maybe not. Red Dead Revolution, the first Red Dead game that people forget about, may not be on Steam. Chicken Little probably doesn't matter. Max Payne is on Steam. Yep. So even in this collection of games, the list there is not that long. As far as backward compatibility is concerned, as far as the older people getting laid off, yeah, I suspect that's going to happen. Is that you're going to see a lot of old talent, people who have experience with old technology get laid off. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe all new games are being programmed in new languages, but it probably matters. It definitely screams brain drain to me. Yeah, I don't know why we have Flesh and Wire open a second time here. Flesh and Wire's second trailer from Gamatsu is the reason why that was opened, although there's a question as to why that tab was on the left. That seems inconsistent with what we've been seeing even now. Gaming on Linux says the NVIDIA 610.43.03 driver has been released with Linux with a vague changelog. Minor bug fixes and improvements is all it says, which typically is what people put when there was a typo and they fixed it. Toys for Bob wants to still work on Banjo-Kazooie, quote, we're huge fans. The Crash and Spyro developer wants to revive Banjo-Kazooie next. This is a Video Games Chronicle article. Okay. We'll see if that ever happens. You still are having a case where a lot of games that just came out on Steam are not that good, even though we are closing the ones that use AI. I do have a concern that maybe in a few years I'll just stop looking at all the new games on Steam in general. But I don't really want to go that far down that path, because I was hoping for looking at new games on Steam to help me find hidden gems and also have my streams stand out and look a little different. A co-op rafting adventure game called Sponge Break has been announced for PC, according to Gamatsu. Mortal Shell 2 is set for release on August 20th. Notice we didn't have a Steam page open up for Sponge Break, which makes me suspect it does have AI in it, which we're going to increasingly see news stories like that, and we'll just have to assume that is the case. We'll put that on the follow list. Mortal Shell 2. I don't know if people really hit the wrong key there. I don't know if people really are going to be that into Mortal Shell 2. I don't know how many people were in the Mortal Shell 1. Definitely not as many people as were in the Bloodborne or Dark Souls. Omega Phoenix commenced Project 6 is going to be published by Astrolabe Games. It's obviously a mecha game of some sort. Vampirium 1997 is a mysteriously looking choice-filled minimalistic immersive sim. This is gaming on Linux. Yeah, I don't know. And this is another example of EA in EA. I need to change the language there to like planned release or planned. Probably could just put the word planned there. There's enough room. Like, even if this was a game without single player and was VR only, that would only be 2 more boxes. That does give me room to change this to early and change this to planned. Yeah. As long as we never run into this being too long, which like September would probably be the longest word and still probably would have plenty of room. Put that on the follow list. Matsu talking about the Game Boy games added to, what is it called? Nintendo Switch Online. See, Gamatsu says Palworld Early Access has topped 40 million players. There is still just that question as far as will it ever satisfactorily leave early access, or will it leave early access and still feel like it is not a finished product. If it does leave early access and there isn't just a huge amount of mixed reviews or negative reviews, then Palworld will make it to the wish list and I will probably check it out way too late. And this is 95% positive, and that gets to overwhelmingly positive. So I guess you do have to get to 95% positivity to reach the overwhelmingly positive marker. I am not 100% sure that there's actually a story for a single player experience in Palworld, though. It might be so online focused or player versus player focused that there isn't much to do if you just want to be a single player. In fact, you may not even really be able to be much of a single player game player. I bet you can. So, meanwhile, for now, we will leave that on the fall list because it's early access. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis is going to end service on October 7th. It's a free-to-play RPG, shutting down 3 years after launch. I don't even remember it, so that probably speaks to how popular it was. Well, what speaks even better is the mixed reviews on Steam, which it's not even on the fall list. Gamatsu has the Tokyo Game Show 2026 exhibitors list and main visual announced. This being the main visual. We have a much better list from Gamatsu as far as who the presenters are, although the vast majority of them are probably not names you would recognize. And there is no guarantee that what they present is going to be anything new. It does feel like the vast majority of things shown at the Tokyo Game Show have already been announced and shown off, at least online, if not at other events. It is very much the case that the Tokyo Game Show is very much a contrast compared to the Summer Games Fest or the Video Game Awards, which I think it would make a lot of sense for them to do something like a Summer Games Fest, specifically for Japanese games. And honestly, I think they would probably do it rather nicely. Japanese tend to be pretty good at having a festival-like experience, so I could see them do that. They just don't have any kind of presenter that would be particularly worldwide known, but I think that's fine too. I think a Tokyo Games Fest, Summer Games Fest presentation where it is a Japanese person standing on stage talking and presenting things, and then a whole bunch of Japanese, just full Japanese language only, presenting things, would work fairly well. Just subtitle it for the rest of the world. So yeah, this is like fully animated, or more live 2D animated, in that the eyes are blinking and they're going back and forth with their hands a little bit. And it's kind of funny that they are bothering to even do that level of fake animation. I can't help but wonder if the food aspect of the Tokyo Game Show is to really imply what is at the Tokyo Game Show. Like, that might be what it is, really implied, is that there is some kind of esports event at the Tokyo Game Show. If there is, I'm not aware of it. There probably is decent concessions. There almost certainly is some cosplaying going on, and there definitely would be merchandise to purchase. And there will definitely be games that you can play or see, with pins possibly also being a thing. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot more sense if these are representations of things you can do at the Tokyo Game Show instead of representations of types of gaming or girls in gaming. Still a little weird that it's all girls, but maybe they were very heavily trying to imply that there will be girls at the Tokyo Game Show, or that they want more girls at the Tokyo Game Show. Which, yeah, you bring the girls anywhere and guys will show up. This looks weird enough to put on the follow list. We probably are close to being done overall, but also we're probably close to just being done with all the news stories. See, Nevergrave, The Witch and the Curse is coming to Android. Currently it's available for console and PC. Yeah. Guess the question here is, why did this one not make it to the wish list? Well, I find that odd, but I'll add it to the wish list now. It is possible some things are slipping through the cracks because they just aren't getting reviewed enough fast enough, and then something makes them more popular later. This Sharkadia game looks like it might be something too. Komatsu says Mario Kart Tour to end service on September 30th. Yeah. Asset Horde Arena doesn't look interesting. Just Pool doesn't look unique enough. Arcade Archives Hyper Crash launches July 9th according to Komatsu. And then Console Archives Rhapsody, a musical adventure, launches July 9th. Which I do recall that name. I don't know if that inherently means it's a good game though. Sisyphus's Worst Day looks like it might be an interesting game. I'll put it on the follow list. Vero, Curse of the Faces. Doesn't look amazing, but I'll put it on the follow list. King's Field-inspired dark fantasy action RPG Vero Curse of Faces is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch on July 30th, alongside a Chaos update, according to Komatsu. One Day Poison the World. Doesn't look that interesting. Mortal Shell 2, we already did something with. It launches August 20th. We still are getting duplicate tabs, but I think what's happening is the tabs are opening up at different times, so they're not getting caught too far apart from each other. Which there's a whole programming way of just like making hashes and sorting through hashes fairly quickly for tab names that I imagine the plugin I'm using is not really doing a good job with. A cozy tile puzzle game, Fangtopia, adds a PS5 and Switch 2 version according to Komatsu. This is probably nothing, but I'll put it on the follow list. Brigandine Abyss demo for the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch 2 launches July 30th. That too is from Komatsu. Again, I'll put it on the follow list, but probably not for me. We have a VR game, and At the moment, I have no system at all to add VR games to a separate list. Just no system in place. And probably won't even implement a system in place to create somewhat secondary follow list for VR games until the Steam frame comes out. Which I suppose it is kind of interesting the Steam frame hasn't come out. I thought they were going to kind of rush Steam Machine and Steam frame out, but frankly, that thing might have been $2,000 and they may have just decided let's put it on the back burner and just keep on working on the code and not rush the Steam frame out. There may very well be a very different feeling as far as how many people were going to get a Steam Machine to then stream games from the Steam Machine to the Steam frame, and thus there may not be that big of a need to rush out a Steam frame now. Let's see, a Harajuku set short story adventure game called Secret of Gummy Shop has been announced for PC. This is a Komatsu article. I don't know what specifically makes it Harajuku set. I have to remind myself what Harajuku meant. Here we have be a judge and allow yourself to be bribed simulator, which I don't know if I really would want to play something like that. I'll just make a short of it and move on. Yeah. Dad versus family. Doesn't sound interesting either. This know him blood rights. No men. Might be something, so I'll put it on the follow list. This might be something. Generally, if I say something that might be something, I'm going to put it on the follow list. I do think we probably now are at the point where we're just looking at games that came out on Steam, which we've done maybe 6 games so far, 7. I will want to get a general idea of how many games that's going to end up being, because it reasonably should be about 20 or 30 after the last news story. Even eliminating AI, I'll give this a chance. Coast Cargo. It doesn't look like anything. Yeah. Let's see. Don't think that's anything. Don't think that's anything. That might be something, probably not. I don't think that's anything. This is probably too simplistic of a game. I'll give it a chance. Ooh, pairing up socks sounds like a crazy game. Definitely doesn't feel like something I would want to play. This is a weird art style. There was a, I think like the Ghostbusters Next Generation kind of had this art style. No eye pupils. I'm going to put this on the follow list just because of the weirdness on it. I'm a fan of weird in theory, but in practicality, I don't think that there's a real amount of visual novels I'd really want to play. This looks like nothing. Sudoku might be interesting. Combining Sudoku and Clue. A lot of these desktop apps I'm also getting rid of, like pretty much all of them. I just don't think I'd ever really run a desktop app. Let's see. Well, I don't know why I ever linked to Grand Blue Fantasy Endless Ragnarok DLC versions. Jokery of Valkyries. Looks like a mobile game, but I'll give it a chance. Yeah. And so, despite the fact that things are still just out of order, we once again have managed to stream for just about 2 hours and 20 minutes, which if we took out a 20-minute break, which there's really no reason to do that, that would put us right at 22 hours. And as I continue to do the follow list cleanup, this pattern of looking at updates for games on the follow list is becoming increasingly useless, which it was already mostly useless anyways, because I just never felt like at the end of a stream going through this. Now I can say, at the moment at least, I don't feel extremely exhausted after 2.5 hours of streaming, which definitely on a bigger Summer Games Fest type stream would still probably be 4 hours, and I would be really exhausted at that point. But on a regular day, it does seem like things are working out fairly well. So yeah, with that, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on